beginning, they told us the sky was empty, that the stars were nothing more than distant firelights burning out in silence. But across time, something else has been watching. From ancient cave paintings depicting tall, elongated beings with hollow eyes, to whispered encounters with the small, gray visitors that come in the dead of night, the pattern is undeniable. They've always been here. The grays, cold, methodical, studying us like specimens. The towering Nordics, almost human, so beautiful, almost too perfect. The shape-shifting reptilians, hiding behind faces we trust. Though, should we? The insect-like Mantis beings, far ancient, calculating, operating far beyond our understanding. And the shadowy entities, the ones without names, the ones that don't need ships to arrive. Some came as observers, some as guides, and even some of them as hunters. Ancient civilizations called them gods. Modern governments call them classified. But those who've seen them, they call them something else entirely. Proof, evidence, disclosure. Tonight, we open some of these archives. The forgotten encounters carved into history, the modern abductions buried under silence, the signals, the sightings, and the terrifying possibility that Earth has never truly belonged to us. Because the truth isn't coming, it's already here. I'm your host, Michael, and this is a special edition of Project Black Garden, Alien Archives. And we'll start this show with a warning. Keep watching the skies. Archive 1. Author, redacted. Status, classified. I was a kindergarten teacher in the fall of 1984. For most of my life, I told no one what happened. The few people who heard the story assumed I was lying, suffering from trauma, or trying to explain away a tragedy that had no explanation. Maybe that's why I've kept silent for more than 40 years. But now I'm old, and the faces of those children still visit me in my dreams. I remember every one of them. Every name, every laugh, even every tiny backpack hanging from the hooks beside our classroom door. But what I remember most of all is the day they all disappeared. It was a Friday. The morning had begun normally enough at Maple Grove Elementary, a small school surrounded by farmland and pine woods. The children were excited because Halloween was only a few weeks away. Construction paper pumpkins covered the classroom walls, and little plastic skeletons dangled from the ceiling tiles. It was my favorite time of year. Around 10:15 a.m., we were sitting in a circle reading stories. 22 children, 22 voices, 22 lives. Then the lights flickered, once, then twice, and finally 3 times. The overhead bulbs dimmed until the room was bathed in a strange gray glow that seemed to come from nowhere. At first, I assumed there was a power problem. Then every sound stopped. Not faded, stopped. No sound. The ventilation system died. The clock above the whiteboard froze. This new silence, it felt impossible. Like someone had removed sound itself from the world. Several children noticed it immediately as well. One little girl raised her hand. "Teacher?" Her voice sounded distant, like she was speaking underwater. Then the windows began to darken, not from clouds, but from something blocking the sun. The sunlight quickly disappeared. Just then, a shadow slowly spread across the classroom floor. I made my way, walking slowly toward the window. Outside, directly above the playground, hung a massive black object. It wasn't an airplane, and it definitely wasn't a helicopter. It was too big. It was shaped like a flattened disc, smooth and seamless, hovering motionless only a few hundred feet above the school. I remember feeling impossibly cold, a deep, instinctive terror unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The children began naturally gathering behind me for protection. One boy pointed upward. It asked, "Who's that?" 3 figures stood beneath the object. They hadn't been there a moment earlier, yet suddenly, there they were. Standing in the middle of the playground, watching us. They were very small, no taller than maybe 4 feet, very thin and gray. Their heads were enormous. Their arms hung unnaturally long beside their bodies. And their eyes? My God, their eyes. They were huge black ovals that reflected no light. Absolutely no emotion on their faces. No humanity whatsoever. Several children immediately started crying, causing more to follow. One little boy hid behind my legs. He was one of my favorites from the class, Stephen. I wanted to move, and I wanted to run, but for some reason my body wouldn't respond. Every muscle felt frozen. That's when the classroom door slowly opened. No one touched it. It simply swung inward. The 3 figures stood in the hallway. I never saw them cross the distance from the playground. One moment they were outside, the next they were inside. The children screamed immediately. I tried to reach them. I tried to shield them, but something held me in place. I couldn't move. That's when the pressure filled my skull. A painful vibration that felt as though invisible hands were squeezing my brain. The tallest figure stepped forward. Its eyes moved across the room, searching. One child at a time. Slowly and methodically, as if taking inventory. Then, one by one, the children began standing. Not voluntarily. Their movements were stiff and unnatural, like puppets pulled upright by invisible strings. Some were still crying, and some were screaming for their parents. Others looked dazed, almost asleep, like they were under a spell. The 3 figures never spoke, yet I could hear something inside my head. A voice. It was cold and mechanical. It sounded ancient. And it said, "Do not interfere." I watched in horror as the children formed a line. 22 small bodies with 22 terrified faces, marching toward the hallway, directly toward the waiting figures. One little girl managed to grab my hand as she passed. Her tiny fingers squeezed mine. She was crying terribly, begging me not to let them take her. I can still hear her voice. And if I try hard enough, I can still feel her hand. But most of all, I can still remember the moment she was pulled away. I fought with everything I had, but the pressure inside my head became unbearable. Blood began trickling from my nose before running more steadily. That's when my vision blurred and the darkness swallowed the room. When I woke up, I was lying on the classroom floor. The lights were back on. The sounds had returned. The clock was ticking, and I was surrounded by police officers. One of the first things I heard were parents screaming outside. The classroom was empty. Every child was gone. Not one remained. Under my watch, the entire kindergarten class had vanished. Search teams were already combing the woods, and that lasted for months. Quickly, the National Guard was even brought in. Day and night, helicopters flew overhead, but they found nothing. The story made national news for a week before abruptly disappearing. And then things got real strange. Officials blamed a gas leak, of all things, that led to mass hysteria. Then finally, a kidnapping theory. But none of it made sense. There was no evidence for any of it, and no evidence was ever found. No bodies. There was no ransom demands. There was nothing. Just gone. It was as if the children simply ceased to exist. Years later, I visited the abandoned school. Most of the building had been demolished, and nature had reclaimed what remained. I stood near the old playground. I noticed something partially buried beneath the dirt. A small plastic jack-o'-lantern. One of the decorations from our classroom. Slowly, I picked it up, and underneath it was a child's drawing. Faded, but still visible. A crayon picture of 3 gray figures standing beneath a giant black circle in the sky. At the bottom, written in uneven kindergarten handwriting, were 6 words. They said, "We are coming back." I left immediately, sick to my stomach, and I never returned. But sometimes, late at night, I wake to a sensation I haven't felt since 1984. The feeling of being watched, not by one presence, but by 3. Standing silently in the darkness beyond my bedroom door, there are the 3, wait, counting, making sure I remember. And somewhere, if they're still alive after all these years, I wonder if those 22 children remember too. And I wonder if they will ever come back. Archive 2. Author unknown. Status classified, but ongoing. The first time I saw the light above the mountains of Iceland, I thought it was an aircraft in trouble. I was wrong. It happened in the winter of 1987 while I was traveling alone through the northern highland near Lake Muvatan. I had rented a tiny isolated cabin used mostly by hikers and sheep farmers during the warmer months. The place sat beneath a wall of black volcanic mountains where the wind never seemed to stop screaming. Every local I spoke to warned me not to wander the valleys after dark, not because of storms, but because of the hidden people I laughed at the stories back then. On the third night, the sky changed. The northern lights had been rolling overhead for hours, curtains of green and blue twisting across the darkness, when a new light appeared above the mountains. It didn't move like an airplane. It descended silently, glowing white hot against the clouds, before stopping dead in the air. Perfectly still. The aurora around it seemed to bend. That's when my truck engine died. So did the cabin lights. The only sound left was the wind hammering the valley. I stepped outside into the snow up to my boots and watched the object drift downward behind the ridge overlooking the cabin. No roar, no flames, just silence so complete it made my ears hurt. That's when my curiosity overpowered the fear. I grabbed my flashlight and started hiking toward the ridge. The climb took almost 40 minutes through volcanic rock and knee-deep snow. The higher I climbed, the stranger the air felt, warm in some places, but ice cold in others. My flashlight flickered constantly, and several times I heard footsteps behind me, only to turn and find nothing there. When I finally reached the top, I saw the craft. It rested in a frozen valley below, like a massive silver tear dropped from the sky. It was smooth and seamless. No windows, no markings. Pale white light pulsed beneath its surface, like something alive, breathing under skin. The snow around it had melted into black, steaming earth. In that moment, I knew I should have run. But instead, I climbed down. The closer I got, the more wrong everything felt. My thoughts slowed. The wind disappeared completely near the object, as though sound itself refused to enter the valley. Then I noticed I wasn't alone. Someone stood near the craft. At first, I thought it was a human woman. She was tall, blonde hair hanging almost to her waist. Her skin was pale and untouched by the cold despite the violent Icelandic winter surrounding us. She wore a tight, white suit that reflected the light from the object behind her. But it was her eyes that stopped me. They were bright blue, but they weren't naturally blue. It was almost as if they were glowing. She watched me approach with an expression that wasn't hostile, but it wasn't human either. It was calm and felt ancient, like she already knew every decision I would make before I made it. "You should not have come here," she warned. Her English was perfect, but something about the rhythm sounded wrong, too precise. I asked her who she was. She tilted her head slightly before answering. "We have been called many things." The air around me vibrated when she spoke, not loudly, deep inside my chest, like her voice carried frequencies I couldn't fully hear. I ignored that and asked if the craft was hers. She glanced back at it briefly, and then she smiled. And suddenly, every fear instinct in my body ignited at once. Because the smile she gave me, it looked practiced, artificial, like she had learned it by observing humans. "You saw the signal," she said. "Few are meant to." Before I could answer, the ground beneath my boots trembled. The silver craft began glowing brighter, and I noticed shadows moving beneath its surface, tall shapes pacing slowly inside the light. They were watching me. I stumbled backward, and that's when her expression changed. Not anger, but disappointment. "You are afraid," she said quietly. The mountains around us suddenly filled with a low humming sound. Snow vibrated off the rocks. My vision blurred, and I dropped to one knee as pressure exploded inside my skull. Images flooded my mind. Massive black space between stars, cities burning, objects falling through Earth's atmosphere for thousands of years. And people. There were human beings standing beside figures like her throughout history. I saw kings. I saw different versions of soldiers, scientists, famous and unknown, even religious leaders. Then I saw something else. Not all of them looked like her. Some were thin gray figures moving through dark corridors beneath the earth. One of them turned to me, and I realized it was aware I was seeing it. That's when the pain became unbearable. I screamed and collapsed into the snow. When I looked up again, the blonde woman stood inches away from me. Her glowing eyes had lost all warmth now. "We tried to guide your species," she whispered, "but you worship fear." Then, the humming. It intensified. The craft lifted slightly into the air, snow spiraling violently around it. The woman stepped backwards into the light without taking a single visible step. And just like that, she vanished. The object shot upward so fast it split the clouds apart above the valley. Gone in less than a second. The silence afterward felt worse than the encounter itself. I somehow made it back to the cabin before dawn. The truck started immediately, and the lights worked again, as if nothing was ever wrong with it. But when I looked in the mirror hanging beside the cabin door, there was a thin white mark beneath my right eye. I swear had not been there before. It's still there now. A small scar shaped almost like a crescent moon. And every few years, usually during the winter storms, I dream about that valley in Iceland. In my dream, the silver craft is waiting, and the woman is standing beside it. Mysterious, beautiful, haunting. And there she stands, smiling, that almost human smile. Archive 3. Classified on all levels. The official story said the fire started from faulty wiring beneath a shopping center in Moscow. That was a lie. I know because I was there. It happened in November of 2004 inside a mega mall, a massive concrete labyrinth built during the final years of the Soviet Union. 6 floors of shops, underground train access, movie theaters, food courts. The kind of place where thousands of people wandered every night beneath the flickering fluorescent lights. I worked maintenance on the graveyard shift. At 11:47 p.m., the power failed across the entire building. Not partially, everything. Escalators froze. Music stopped. The emergency lights clicked on in dim red rows along the ceiling. At first, people just complained and laughed nervously. Then, the screaming started on the 4th floor. I remember hearing gunshots first. Short bursts, military style. 3 guards sprinted past me toward the electronics wing while shoppers crowded the exits. A woman grabbed my arm, crying that monsters were killing people upstairs. I thought she was insane until I saw one. It crashed through a jewelry store window at the end of the corridor. It was tall, muscular, covered in dark green scales that reflected the emergency lighting like wet skin. Its eyes were enormous and gold-colored, with vertical black pupils. It wore black armor, strapped tightly against its body, and in its hands was some kind of weapon glowing faint blue. The thing moved with terrifying speed. 1 second it stood across the corridor, the next it was on top of a security guard. I watched it slash the man open with curved claws so fast The guard didn't even scream at first. Blood sprayed across storefront glass while shoppers trampled each other trying to escape. The panic was everywhere. Then I saw what it was hunting. Another creature emerged from the smoke near the escalators. It was pale-skinned, thin, almost human-looking, except for its oversized black eyes and elongated limbs. It looked terrified, and I think it was injured. It wasn't attacking anyone. It was just running for its life. The reptilian creatures chased it through the mall like wolves hunting their prey. Suddenly, more arrived. 3 of them dropped from the skylight above in a shower of broken glass. One landed directly on a crowd near the food court. People scattered, screaming while the creature opened fire with a weapon that didn't sound like bullets. The blasts were silent flashes of blue light, and anyone hit by it collapsed instantly. No wounds. They were just dead. The smell was horrible. Burned metal and cooked flesh. It made me feel sick. I hid beneath a collapsed kiosk while the reptilians stalked the corridors. They communicated through clicking sounds and low growls that echoed through the ventilation systems. Every few minutes, another burst of screams erupted somewhere deeper in the mall. Finally, the soldiers arrived. Not police, but secret Russian military. The units wearing black chemical suits stormed the entrances around midnight. They sealed every exit and began shooting civilians who tried to flee. That's when I understood. This wasn't the first time. The soldiers weren't there to save us. They were there to cover everything up. They were there to erase us. I watched them corner the pale alien near the central fountain on the first floor. The creature raised its hands like it was surrendering. One reptilian approached slowly, then tore its throat open without hesitation. The sound it made barely resembled anything human. The soldiers opened fire immediately afterward, not at the reptilians, at the witnesses. Men, women, teenagers, anyone who had seen anything. I managed to stay hidden beneath dead bodies for nearly 3 hours while gunfire and screams echoed through the mall. Around 4 a.m., the surviving reptilian creatures gathered near the shattered fountain beneath the skylight. A bright, impossible white light filled the building. Then they all vanished, gone, instantly. By sunrise, government trucks surrounded the area. Bodies were loaded into black containers. Soldiers forced survivors to sign documents blaming a terrorist gas explosion for the deaths. Officially, 87 people died in the quote-unquote fire. Unofficially, it was far more. I know because I still see them sometimes in my nightmares. The reptilian things, watching from the upper floors of the mall with those cold gold eyes while blood ran down the escalators. And the worst part, a week later, when state television aired footage of the damaged building, one section of the video showed a military officer speaking to another man near the entrance. But that second man wasn't human. For less than a second, the camera caught his eyes, reflecting gold. We are not alone. We are not safe. Archive 4. Codename The Visitor. Author redacted. Status ongoing. I woke suddenly, not because of a noise, but because of a feeling. You know that sensation you get when someone is staring at you. That deep, instinctive certainty that another presence is nearby. It felt like that, except magnified 100 times. My eyes opened slowly to the darkness of my bedroom. The red numbers of my alarm clock glowed softly beside the bed. 3:07 a.m. For several seconds, I simply lay there listening. The house was completely silent. No air conditioner, no creaking floorboards, no distant traffic. The kind of silence that feels unnatural. Then I noticed something standing at the foot of my bed. At first, my sleepy mind struggled to understand what I was seeing. I assumed it was a coat hanging on a chair, or a trick of the moonlight filtering through the curtains. That's when it moved. A small figure stepped forward into a shaft of pale silver light, causing my stomach to drop instantly. The thing was no more than 4 feet tall. Its body was impossibly thin, with long arms hanging below its waist. Smooth, gray skin stretched tightly across its frame, giving it an almost skeletal appearance. Its oversized head seemed too large for its body, and its black eyes reflected the moonlight like polished obsidian. I tried to sit up, and I couldn't. I tried to scream, but nothing happened. Every muscle in my body had become completely useless. The creature tilted its head slightly as though studying my reaction. Its face contained almost no expression, yet somehow I sensed curiosity behind those enormous eyes. Then a voice appeared inside my mind. Remain calm. The words felt cold and artificial, like a computer attempting to initiate compassion. The gray alien slowly approached the bed. Each movement was unnaturally smooth, almost as if it were gliding rather than walking. When it finally reached me, one of its long fingers touched the center of my forehead. Pain exploded through my skull. It was unbearable. Then the room vanished instantly. Suddenly, I found myself lying naked on a metal table beneath blinding white lights. The air smelled sterile, almost chemical. Shadows moved all around me. I couldn't tell at first, but I was sure it was more grays. At least a dozen. They stood in a circle, silently observing me. One leaned over my face. Its black eyes filled my vision. Then its small mouth opened. There were no teeth. I couldn't see a tongue. And I don't even know if there was a throat. Only a dark void where a mouth should have been. The darkness inside seemed impossibly deep. Endless. I screamed, and instantly I woke up. I was back in my bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. The clock beside me still read 3:07 a.m. That's when I let the first little bit of relief flood through me. It had been a nightmare, only a nightmare. Thank God, nothing more. Then I looked toward the window. The curtains were open. I distinctly remember closing them before going to sleep. And beneath the window, pressed into the dust of my nightstand, sat a tiny, gray handprint. Fresh and devastating. And finally, listeners, we shall leave you with the impossible. A story dated from the future. How the Black Garden Files came to acquire this is unknown, but heed its warning. Archive 5. I was in Studio B when the world ended. October 14th, 2053. Channel 8 News in Denver. Tuesday night weather segment. I remember stupid details more clearly than anything else now. The smell of burnt coffee in the control room. Karen complaining about her microphone battery. One of the interns eating onion rings near the soundboard. You know, normal things. The kind of things you miss after civilization collapses. We were 30 seconds into the live forecast when every monitor in the station flickered black simultaneously. Not just our feed, everything, everywhere. Satellite returns, radar maps, local cameras, gone. I started yelling at engineering, thinking we'd blown a transformer somewhere. Then the audio board exploded with static so loud people ripped their headsets off. Karen froze mid-sentence on camera. She was staring behind camera 2. At first, I thought somebody had wandered into the studio by accident. Then I looked at the monitor, and something was standing behind her. Extremely tall, unnaturally thin, green-black skin that looked wet beneath the studio lights. It had folded limbs tucked against its chest like a giant insect waiting to strike. Its head nearly touched the lighting rig overhead. Nobody in the studio moved. Not the cameraman, not Karen, nobody. The creature tilted its head slowly toward camera 1. Then every television in the control room switched to its face. I still have nightmares about those eyes. Huge black surfaces with pupils, or whites. Not empty exactly, worse than empty. They were intelligent in a way that made human intelligence feel primitive. And this alien thing spoke perfect English. It said, "We request immediate global attention." Its voice sounded wrong, wet clicking underneath every word, like two sounds playing simultaneously. Karen tried to hold back, but finally she screamed. The creature moved so fast I barely saw it happen. 1 second, she was backing away from it. The next, she was lifted off the floor by one hooked arm around her throat. People in the control room started panicking. Someone yelled to cut the feed, but we couldn't. Every system in the building was locked out. The creature seemed to control the broadcast completely, and it knew millions of people were watching. "We regret this demonstration," it said calmly. Karen was still alive, choking and kicking helplessly in the air. Then the thing tightened its arm, and I heard her neck break through the studio microphones, live on national television. Nobody in the control room spoke after that. The creature let her body drop onto the weather stage behind it before continuing like nothing had happened. "A celestial extinction event approaches your planet." Images began to appear across every monitor in the station. Hundreds of objects moving through space toward Earth, massive enough to wipe us out completely. They look like meteors. The creature explained the impacts would begin in 12 days, and that they were here to help us, and that they would give humanity a choice: surrender authority of Earth to the species, and they would stop the upcoming extinction. Refuse their help, and we would all die. I remember staring through the control room glass at Karen's body lying twisted beneath the weather map, while this thing calmly negotiated ownership of the human race. And the worst part of me believed it. Everybody did. Quickly, governments confirmed the incoming objects within hours. Astronomers tracked them. Panic spread instantly. Cities rioted by the morning. The worst of worst. The broadcasts continue every night after that. And it was always the same species. Mantis-like creatures appearing on hijacked television feeds around the world, promising salvation. And every time they appeared, more people agreed to surrender. I worked in that station during the entire crisis. I watched world leaders beg these things for mercy on live television. I watched the largest of religions collapse. Stood by while military officials openly cried during interviews because there was supposedly no defense against the meteors. Then came day 12. I was still inside the studio when the objects arrived, only they didn't fall. We had been told over and over again how quickly the devastation would be. But instead of falling and smashing into the earth, they slowed. The entire newsroom went silent as thousands of glowing meteors stopped in the sky above Earth's cities. Then, unbelievably, they opened. They were ships. Black insect-shaped crafts hidden inside rocky outer shells. I remember whispering to myself, "Oh God," just before the station windows shattered inward. The first Mantis soldier entered through the glass in a spray of blood and metal. It unfolded to its full height right inside the newsroom, at least 8 feet tall, with hooked forearms sharpened like blades. It killed 3 of my friends and co-workers before they could even run. Not out of anger, but out of efficiency. That's what was the most terrifying. There was no rage in them, no hatred. Humans were simply obstacles being processed. I managed to escape through a maintenance stairwell while the station filled with screaming behind me. Outside, the city looked like hell. Giant ships hovered over downtown, releasing swarms of smaller creatures into the streets. And above everything, that clicking sound. Millions of them communicating across the city at once. The surrender had all been part of the invasion. They never came to save us. They came to make sure we dismantled our defenses before they arrived. That was 7 months ago. I'm recording this now from an abandoned utility tunnel beneath Denver. Most survivors don't use lights anymore because the Mantis patrols could see heat through walls. Every few nights we hear people dragged screaming into the harvesting towers downtown. Sometimes the creatures still hijack old television signals. They broadcast their message constantly. Promises of order, promises of survival. But now we know what they really mean. Last night, I found an old portable TV that managed to still work. The screen flickered to life around 2 a.m. One of the Mantis leaders appeared staring directly into the camera, and standing behind it was Karen, or something wearing Karen's body. Her eyes were completely black. Her mouth moved wrong, twitching unnaturally while she smiled at the camera. Then both of them looked directly forward, together, and they said, "Thank you for welcoming us to your world." This is what disclosure looks like. The end of the world. As we close the files on tonight's investigations, one question remains. What if the truth was never hidden? What if it has been staring down at us from the night sky all along? From the ancient stories carved into stone to the modern encounters that continue to surface across the world, the mystery endures. The Greys, the Nordics, the Reptilians, the Mantis beings. There are countless witnesses and even more sightings, and still more questions than answers. Maybe they're just explorers. They're definitely observers. Or maybe, just maybe, they're waiting for the right moment to make themselves known. Whatever the truth may be, humanity has always looked upward, searching for answers. And perhaps one day, something will answer back. But will we like that answer? Until then, the archives remain open. If you enjoyed tonight's special episode, be sure to follow, share, and join us for future investigations as we continue digging through the strangest mysteries hidden within the Black Garden Files. I'm your host, Michael. And remember, the universe is far too vast for us to be alone, and the lights in the sky may not always be stars. Keep watching the skies.